She accidentally sent a bikini photo to her millionaire boss. He saw the picture but did not say a single word. The next day, he asked her to come up alone to his office behind closed doors. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching. Laura Lee had learned to live in silence. Her footsteps were measured, her voice low, and her gaze, though beautiful, carried something resembling shards of glass. Lovely, yes, but sharp for anyone who tried to see too deeply. At 39, emerging from a marriage where love and violence had blurred beneath the veneer of upper-middle-class respectability, Laura was starting over in an indifferent London, a city vast enough that no one would notice her invisible scars. She'd changed her married name, her social circles, her hometown, everything except the ghosts. They followed her in silence like a second skin. When she secured a position as executive assistant at the headquarters of Thorne Publishing, she felt for the first time in years that she might simply be professional, invisible, useful, discreet. But the man she'd come to work for, Adrian Thorne, was anything but ordinary. A reclusive millionaire, a magnate of the written word, surrounded by mysteries and internal legends, Adrian was known for his prolonged absences, his impenetrable rigidity, and his past shrouded by tragedy. The death of his wife 10 years earlier, under circumstances never clarified. Adrian didn't smile. He didn't praise. He made no effort to appear human. His presence was like a dense shadow, elegant and dangerous, an aura that both attracted and repelled. Which was why when Laura, on an ordinary Sunday, attempting to send a bikini photo to her best friend, with whom she confided, accidentally attached the image to the corporate chat meant for Adrian, she knew even before receiving any response that something had been irrevocably broken, but he didn't respond. There was no reply, no reprimand, no visible reaction. Only silence. And then, the following Monday, a new behavior emerged. Unexpected invitations to private meetings, delegated tasks that previously went through third parties, corporate trips requiring her company. Adrian began observing her with a look that wasn't censure, nor was it simple desire. It was something more ancestral, almost clinical, as if he were trying to decipher her or perhaps shape her. Adrian's office, on the top floor of a renovated historic building in Bloomsbury, was a place of shadow and stifling heat, with heavy curtains, rare books in Latin, and expressionist paintings of anonymous women who seemed to watch her whenever she entered. Gradually, Laura realized he conducted interactions like someone writing a novel, with scenes, pauses, building tension. The silence between them was like a held breath before touch, and then he began to provoke her. Small ambiguous orders, subtly intimate comments, a control that didn't come from shouting, but from calculated gestures, strategically long pauses, fleeting touches on her hand when passing her a pen. And at the same time, there was a hidden kindness, almost childlike in certain moments, like when he offered her a book with an old dedication. From his deceased wife, the name, also Laura. It was too much of a coincidence. Over time, Laura began to notice that the similarities to the former wife went far beyond the name. They had the same educational background, the same rounded handwriting, the same whispered tone of voice. And then anonymous notes began appearing on her desk, with enigmatic phrases, "You are being written," or "He always finishes the book the same way." That was when she found it. Hidden behind a bookshelf in the office, an unfinished manuscript, a diary, or perhaps a script. In it, Adrian narrated scenes with a woman who seemed to be her, but the entries predated her arrival, long predated it. The oldest was dated 8 years ago. How could he have written about someone with amber eyes, discreet freckles on the left shoulder, and the habit of touching her lips when nervous, all her characteristics, before even meeting her? The morning Laura found the manuscript, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. The leather binding was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges, and the ink had that particular fade that came only with time. She'd been searching for a contract Adrian had mentioned, something about foreign rights for a debut novelist, and instead she'd pulled out what looked like a journal. Her journal. Except it couldn't be. She sat on the floor of his office, the manuscript spread across her lap, and read with growing horror. The handwriting was Adrian's. She recognized the sharp angles of his letters, the way he crossed his T's with an almost violent slash. But the content? She touches her collarbone when she lies, one entry read. A tell so subtle I wonder if she knows it herself. Her fingers dance there, just above the hollow of her throat, as if checking for a pulse. Making sure she's still real. Laura's hand flew to her collarbone. She did that. She'd done it just this morning when the receptionist asked if she'd had a good weekend. And she'd said yes. Fine, thank you. When really she'd spent both days in her tiny Kentish town flat, curtains drawn, trying not to think about the way Adrian had looked at her on Friday evening as she'd left the office. She flipped through more pages. There were dozens of entries, all describing this woman, this Laura, in excruciating detail. The way she organized her desk with militant precision, how she drank her coffee black, but added sugar when she thought no one was watching. The small scar on her right wrist that she hid with bracelets. Laura pulled up her sleeve and stared at the thin white line there, a remnant from her marriage, from a night she tried not to remember. "How is this possible?" she whispered to the empty office. The entry dated February 14th, 8 years ago, made her stomach turn. I've been dreaming of her again. The woman who will replace what was lost. She doesn't exist yet, not in flesh, but she's there in my mind, fully formed. Laura. She'll be called Laura, and when she comes I'll know her immediately, even if she doesn't know herself. The manuscript fell from her hands. For a long moment Laura couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the terrifying implications of what she'd just read. This wasn't research. This wasn't fiction. This was, what, prophecy, obsession, madness? She should leave. She should walk out of this office, out of this building, and never come back. She should go to HR, to the police, to someone who could make sense of what felt like a violation so profound she couldn't even name it. But instead, she found herself reading more, compelled by the same morbid curiosity that makes people slow down at accident scenes. An entry from 5 years ago. I saw her today, or someone who could become her, in a cafe in Hampstead. She had the wrong hair, the wrong voice, but there was something in the way she moved. I followed her for 3 blocks before I realized what I was doing. This has to stop, or perhaps it has to continue. Perhaps this is the only way to finish what began the night my Laura died. His Laura, the first Laura, Laura Thorne, the woman whose death had been ruled accidental, though the whispers around the office suggested otherwise. They fought down the stairs in their Kensington townhouse. Too much wine at a dinner party. An argument that neighbors reported but couldn't quite recall the details of. Adrian had been out of the country, they said, in Frankfurt for a book fair. He'd returned to find his wife dead and his life irrevocably altered. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if... You shouldn't be reading that. Laura's head snapped up. Adrian stood in the doorway, perfectly still, perfectly composed in his charcoal suit and burgundy tie. His face betrayed nothing, not anger, not surprise, not even mild annoyance. Just that steady, unsettling calm that made her feel like a specimen under glass. I was looking for the contract, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The one for... I know what you were looking for. He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. And you found something else instead. As you were meant to. Meant to. Laura stood, clutching the manuscript to her chest like a shield. You left this where I would find it. I left it where you might find it if you were curious enough. Brave enough. He moved closer and she fought the urge to back away. You are, aren't you, Laura? Brave despite everything you've survived. Her blood ran cold. What do you know about what I've survived? Everything. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Did you think I hired you based solely on your CV? I'm a publisher, Laura. I research. I investigate. I understand story, and you have a story written all over you, in the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, in the haunted look that crosses your face when you think no one's watching, in the fact that you applied for this position under your maiden name, even though you've been divorced for less than a year. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the manuscript and flee, but she stood her ground, lifted her chin. If you know so much about me, then you know I didn't come here to be part of whatever twisted game you're playing. Game? Something flickered in his dark eyes. Amusement, maybe, or something darker. This isn't a game, Laura. This is research. This is art. This is the only way I know how to process what cannot be processed through conventional means. By stalking your employees. By finishing what was left unfinished. He took another step forward, close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and vaguely threatening, like leather and smoke. My wife died before we could complete our story. Before we could reach the ending we were meant to have. And I've spent 10 years trying to write my way past that loss, trying to understand how a life can be interrupted. Mid-sentence, how a narrative can simply stop. So you've been searching for a replacement, Laura said, her voice flat. Someone to play the role of the dead wife. Someone to give you your ending. No. His hand rose and she tensed, but he only reached past her to take the manuscript from her grasp. His fingers brushed hers and she felt the contact like an electric shock. I've been searching for understanding, for closure, for the woman who could help me finish what we began. And the universe, in its infinite irony, sent me you. I'm not her. I know you're not. He opened the manuscript, flipping to a page near the end. But you could be. Not a replacement, Laura. An evolution, a continuation. The next chapter in a story that never should have ended the way it did. She stared at him, at the intensity burning in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her, a dangerous recognition of the darkness she saw there. Because hadn't she been trying to write her own ending? Hadn't she fled her marriage, changed her name, rebuilt herself piece by piece, all in an attempt to author a new narrative for her life? This is insane, she whispered. Perhaps. Adrian closed the manuscript, set it on his desk with deliberate care. Or perhaps it's the only sane response to an insane world. You tell me, Laura, you've lived through your own tragedy, your own unfinished story. Don't you want to know how it ends? Don't you want to write yourself a better conclusion than the one you were given? She should say no. She should walk away. She should recognize this for what it was. Manipulation, psychological warfare, the calculated seduction of a man who understood the power of narrative and was using it as a weapon. But instead, she heard herself ask, what happened to your wife? His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very still, very cold. She fell. That's what the report said. But what really happened? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then slowly, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. Now it showed a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, with Laura's build and coloring, though the face was different. She stood in what looked like the same office they were in now, surrounded by books, smiling at whoever held the camera. We had an argument, Adrian said quietly, about a manuscript I'd written. She'd found it, you see. Just as you found this one, a story about another woman. A fantasy, I told her, fiction. But she didn't believe me. She thought I was planning to leave her, to replace her with this imaginary ideal. And she was so angry, so hurt. She ran out of the office, down the stairs, and he stopped, his jaw tight. The authorities called it an accident. Too much wine, they said. Unstable footing. But I knew the truth. She fell because of what I'd written, because of my obsession with perfect narrative, because I couldn't love the real woman in front of me without trying to edit her into something more. Laura felt her throat tighten. And now you're doing it again. With me? No. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something almost like pain in his face. Now I'm trying to do it differently. Now I'm being honest from the start. Now I'm not hiding what I am or what I want. I want to finish the story, Laura, but I want to finish it with someone who chooses to be part of it. Someone who understands the cost and decides it's worth paying anyway. Why would anyone choose this? Because you're already part of an unfinished story, aren't you? Your marriage, your escape, your reinvention. You came here trying to disappear, to become invisible, but that's just another kind of ending. Not a satisfying one, not the one you deserve, and he paused. Work with me, Laura. Let me help you write something better. For both of us. It was the most insane proposition she'd ever heard. It was manipulation and madness, dressed up in the language of mutual benefit. It was every red flag she'd learned to recognize in her marriage. Every warning sign that had taken her years to finally heed. And yet, there was something seductive in the idea of being seen so completely, of having someone look at you, really look, and choose to write you into their narrative anyway. After years of making herself small, invisible, safe, the thought of being the subject of such intense focus felt almost intoxicating. I need time, she said finally, to think about this, all of this. Adrian nodded slowly. Of course. But while you're thinking, consider this. The manuscript you found wasn't my only one. There are others. Other attempts to write my way past what happened. Other women who almost fit the story I needed to tell. Would you like to know what happened to them? Her pulse quickened. Tell me. They left, each one. They saw what I was offering and they ran, as any sensible person would. But their stories didn't end well, Laura. The universe has a way of punishing unfinished narratives. Loose ends have consequences. He moved to the window, looked out at the London skyline. 3 years ago, there was a woman named Catherine. She worked here for 6 months before she realized what I was searching for and resigned. 2 months later, she was in a car accident on the M25. Survived, but barely. Lost the use of her left arm. Laura's mouth went dry. You're saying that happened because she walked away from you. I'm saying that happened because she walked away from the story. Because she left it unfinished. Because in matters of narrative, real deep archetypal narrative, there are consequences for abandonment. He turned back to face her. So I'm not threatening you, Laura. I'm warning you. Once you're part of a story like this, you're in it. The only question is whether you move forward toward an ending or try to run and leave it forever incomplete. She wanted to call him delusional. She wanted to laugh in his face and tell him that life didn't work that way. That coincidence wasn't cosmic punishment, that he was just a rich man with too much time and too much grief, who'd convinced himself his obsessions had metaphysical significance. But she couldn't, because hadn't she felt it herself? That sense of unfinished business with her ex-husband. The way fate seemed to keep circling her back to the same patterns, the same mistakes, the same type of controlling man. Maybe Adrian was right. Maybe the only way out was through. Maybe the only way to end the story was to finish it properly. I'll think about it, she said again. Don't think too long. Adrian returned to his desk, picked up the manuscript, held it out to her. Take this, read it properly. See if you recognize yourself in these pages, and then decide if you want to help me write the final chapter. She took the manuscript with numb fingers. What if I say no? His smile was small and sad. Then you'll say no, and we'll see what happens next. But I hope you won't, Laura, I really do, because I think we could write something extraordinary together, something that makes sense of all the senseless pain we've both endured. Isn't that worth exploring? She left his office without answering, the manuscript heavy in her hands, her mind reeling. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She went through the motions of her work, emails, phone calls, scheduling, but her thoughts were elsewhere, circling endlessly around the impossible choice Adrian had presented. That evening, in her small flat with its rented furniture and blank walls, Laura sat on her bed and opened the manuscript again. This time she read it from beginning to end. Every unsettling entry, every detailed description of a woman who didn't exist 8 years ago, but existed now. Existed as her. And as she read, she began to notice something else. The entries weren't just observations. They were instructions, blueprints, a step-by-step guide to becoming this perfect Laura, this idealized version of womanhood that Adrian had constructed in his grief and obsession. She will wear her hair loose on Fridays, one entry read. Laura touched her hair loose because it was Friday. She will drink Earl Grey tea with a slice of lemon, never milk. She glanced at the mug on her nightstand. Earl Grey lemon. How many of her choices were actually hers? How many had been subtly suggested, encouraged, shaped by Adrian's expectations over the past 6 months? She'd thought she was rebuilding herself. But what if she'd actually been building herself according to someone else's design? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something else. Something she couldn't quite name. A dark thrill at being so thoroughly seen, so completely understood. Even if that understanding came with strings. Even if it meant surrendering some portion of her autonomy. Her phone buzzed. A message from Adrian. No words, just an image. A page from another manuscript. This one blank except for a single line at the top. Chapter 12. Laura makes her choice. She stared at that blank page for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally, she typed a single word, when. His response came immediately. Tomorrow. My house, 8 p.m. The address is attached. Come alone. Come ready to finish what we've begun. She should ignore it. She should block his number. Go to HR first thing Monday morning. File a formal complaint. She should do any of a dozen sensible things that would extract her from this situation before it went any further. Instead, she put the address into her phone and set an alarm for 7 the next evening. Then she lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what kind of ending she was writing for herself. Happy, tragic, ambiguous? She honestly didn't know. She only knew that she was tired of running from her own narrative, tired of playing it safe, tired of being a character in someone else's story, without ever claiming authorship of her own. If Adrian wanted to write her into his manuscript, then fine. But she'd make damn sure she had a pen of her own. She'd make damn sure that whatever ending they reached, it would be one she chose, one she earned, one that finally made sense of all the chapters that had come before. The next evening, Laura stood outside Adrian's Kensington townhouse, her finger hovering over the doorbell. The building was beautiful. Victorian architecture, pristine white facade, wrought iron balconies on the upper floors, expensive, imposing. The kind of place that existed in a London that most people only saw in magazines. She pressed the bell, heard it chime inside, counted her heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, 4 before the door opened. Adrian stood there in casual clothes she'd never seen him wear. Dark jeans, a grey sweater, no shoes. It was jarring, seeing him like this, domestic and almost vulnerable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he stepped back, gestured inside. Thank you for coming. I haven't decided anything, she said. But she crossed the threshold anyway. The interior was as beautiful as the exterior. High ceilings, original moldings, artwork that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. But there was something strange about it too. Every room they passed felt like a stage set, perfect and lifeless. No clutter, no personal touches, just expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision. He led her to a study on the second floor. This room was different. This room was lived in. Books everywhere, on shelves stacked on the floor, piled on the desk. Papers covered every surface. And on one wall, a massive corkboard filled with photographs, notes, newspaper clippings, all connected by red string like something from a detective thriller. Laura moved closer, studying the board. Many of the photographs were of Adrian's first wife, the original Laura, but there were others too. Women who looked similar. Catherine, whose name was written under one photo with the notation incomplete withdrawn. Another woman, marked unsuitable, too defiant. A third, promising relocated. And then in the center a photo of her, Laura Lee, taken without her knowledge, probably on her first day at Thorne Publishing. Under it, Adrian had written, Laura too, the one who will understand. She turned to face him. This is insane. You know that, right? This whole thing is completely insane. Is it? He moved to the desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder. Tell me something, Laura. When you left your husband, what did you tell yourself? That you were escaping? That you were starting over? That you'd never let anyone control you again? Yes, she said through gritted teeth. And yet here you are, in my house, reading my manuscripts, wearing your hair the way I described it would be worn, making the choices I predicted you'd make. He held out the folder. This is your file. Everything I learned about you before I hired you. Your marriage, your divorce, your therapy records, yes, I have those. Your ex-husband's arrest record, the restraining order you filed and then dropped. Everything. She took the folder with shaking hands, flipped it open. And there it was. Her entire history, documented and analyzed like a case study. Bank statements, medical records, photographs of her old house, her ex, even her parents' graves. You're a fucking stalker, she whispered. I'm a researcher, he corrected. And what I researched told me something important. You're not looking for freedom, Laura. You're looking for a better cage, a prettier prison. You spent 15 years with a man who hurt you, who diminished you, who made you feel small. But you stayed because at least his cruelty was familiar. At least his control gave your life structure. And when you finally left, you didn't embrace chaos. You found another kind of order. A job with rigid hierarchies. A flat with bare walls where nothing can touch you. A life so controlled and minimal it might as well not exist. That's not, she started, but he cut her off. What I'm offering you isn't freedom from control. It's intentional control. Consensual control. The chance to be shaped not by violence and fear, but by narrative and desire. To be the subject of a story that actually goes somewhere, that builds to something, that gives all your pain a purpose. He moved closer. You asked me what happened to my wife. I told you she fell. But what I didn't tell you was why. She fell because she couldn't trust the story. She couldn't believe that I was writing her a happy ending. She thought I wanted to replace her, when really I just wanted to perfect what we had, to make it mean something. And did it mean something? After she died? No, he admitted. It meant nothing. It was just loss, just waste, just another tragedy in a world full of them. But with you it could be different. We could write something that redeems all of it. Her death, your suffering, my obsession. We could make it all part of a narrative that actually resolves. Laura looked at the board again, at all those women who'd come before her, and felt a cold certainty settle over her. What happened to them? Really? I told you. They left, they chose unfinished stories, and their lives fell apart in various ways. Coincidence, probably, or self-fulfilling prophecy, or maybe exactly what I said. The universe's way of punishing narrative abandonment. His voice was soft now, almost hypnotic. But you won't leave, Laura. I know you won't because you understand what I'm offering. Not just an ending, but authorship. The chance to write yourself instead of being written. To choose your own narrative arc instead of defaulting to the one your pain prescribed. He was right, and she hated that he was right. Because wasn't that exactly what she wanted? To feel like her life had meaning, had direction, had a shape that made sense. To not just survive, but to tell a story worth telling. If I do this, she said slowly, it's on my terms too. Not just yours. Of course, I want to read everything. Every manuscript, every note, every plan you have. I want complete transparency. Agreed. And if at any point I want out, I walk away. No consequences. No cosmic punishment. Just a clean break. His smile was sad. I can't promise that, Laura. Once you're in the story, you're in it. But I can promise that I'll never lie to you. I'll never hide what I'm doing or why. And I'll never ever hurt you the way you've been hurt before. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was more than she'd gotten from anyone else. More than her ex-husband had ever offered. More than she'd thought to ask for. Show me, she said. Show me what you're really working on. The actual project. Not just the research, but the story itself. Adrian nodded and moved to a locked cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a manuscript, not the one she'd found, but something else, something thicker and more formal. He handed it to her and she read the title page, The Laura Project, a novel in real time. Her blood went cold. You're writing a book. About this. About us. About the search, he clarified. About what it means to try to resurrect the past through narrative. About obsession and loss, and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. Yes, you're in it, but so am I, so is my wife. So are all the others. It's not exploitation, Laura. It's documentation. It's art. She flipped through the pages, saw her own life reflected there, her own choices and fears and desperate hopes, saw how he'd shaped it all into a structure that almost made sense. And despite everything, despite the manipulation, the stalking, the sheer audacity of it all, she felt something inside her shift. Because he was right about one thing. She did want her pain to mean something. She did want her story to matter. When does it end? She asked. The book. How does it end? I don't know yet, Adrian said. That depends on you. On what you choose. On how we write it together. Laura closed the manuscript, met his eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. Then let's find out. The following weeks blurred into something Laura couldn't quite name. Not quite a relationship, not quite an arrangement, but something more complex and consuming than either word could capture. She continued working at Thorn Publishing, continued living in her small flat, continued maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But 3 evenings a week she went to Adrian's Kensington townhouse, and there, behind those pristine white walls, they worked on what he called the project. At first it was just talking. Adrian would sit across from her in his study, a leather notebook open on his lap, and ask questions. Not the superficial kind, not what's your favorite color or where did you grow up, but the kind that burrowed under skin. What did it feel like, he wanted to know, the first time your husband hit you? Not the physical sensation, but the psychological one. The moment when your understanding of your own story fundamentally shifted. When you realized the narrative you'd been living was actually something else entirely. Laura answered, because she'd never had anyone ask with such genuine curiosity, such lack of judgment. Her therapist had been kind but clinical, her best friend supportive but uncomfortable with the darker details. But Adrian listened with the intensity of someone taking notes for a dissertation, which she supposed he was. He was studying her, learning her, writing her, and she was letting him. "Tell me about the day you decided to leave," he said one evening. They were in his study, rain hammering against the windows, the room lit only by a desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Laura pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. It wasn't one day. It was 1,000 days. 1,000 small decisions that finally added up to one big one. But there must have been a moment, a catalyst. Adrian's pen hovered over the page. There always is. She thought back to that morning in March, 8 months ago now. The way the light had looked coming through the kitchen window of her old house in Surrey. The smell of coffee and something burning, toast maybe, or just her life going up in smoke. "He broke my favorite mug," she said quietly. "This ridiculous thing I'd bought at a charity shop years ago. It had a quote on it from Virginia Woolf. 'One cannot think well, love well, sleep well if one has not dined well.' It was stupid and pretentious, and I loved it." And he threw it at the wall during an argument about, I don't even remember what, something trivial. Everything was always trivial until it wasn't. Adrian wrote something down, and that was enough. A broken mug? No. What was enough was the way he looked at me afterward. Not apologetic, not angry, just satisfied. Like he'd achieved something. Like breaking my things was a form of communication, a way of saying, this is what I can do. This is the power I have over you. She met Adrian's gaze, and I realized that I'd given him that power, that every day I stayed I was handing him more of it, writing myself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left but the shape of his anger. So you left, so I left, packed one suitcase while he was at work, took a train to London, found the cheapest flat I could afford, changed my name back, applied for jobs, pretended to be someone who knew what she was doing. She laughed without humor. I thought I was writing myself a new story. Turns out I was just plagiarizing someone else's escape narrative. Following a script for woman leaves abusive husband, starts over, finds herself. As if there's only one way that story can go. And now? Adrian leaned forward. What story are you in now? I don't know, she admitted. That's the terrifying part. I don't know if I'm in a love story or a tragedy or a psychological thriller. I don't know if you're the hero or the villain. I don't even know if I'm the protagonist or just a supporting character in someone else's narrative. You're the protagonist, Adrian said with absolute certainty. You've always been the protagonist. That's what drew me to you. You have that quality, that sense of someone fighting against their own plot. Most people just accept the story they're in. They play their parts without question. But you're always looking for the exits, always trying to rewrite the script. It's extraordinary. It should have sounded like a compliment. Instead, it sounded like an observation a scientist might make about a particularly interesting specimen. But Laura was getting used to that. Adrian viewed everything through the lens of narrative, including human emotion. Maybe especially human emotion. I read more of your manuscript last night, she said, changing the subject. The parts about your wife, the original Laura. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A tightening. And? You loved her. That comes through clearly. But you also resented her. For being real. For not fitting the story you wanted to tell. Laura paused. Is that what happened? She couldn't live up to the character you'd written for her? She was perfect, Adrian said flatly. That was the problem. She was so perfect, so idealized in my mind, that the real woman, the one who snored and forgot to pay bills and got irrationally angry about minor things, felt like a disappointment. Like a rough draft I couldn't quite polish into final form. And I know how that sounds. I know it makes me a monster. But I'm trying to be honest with you, Laura. That's the point of this. Complete honesty, even when it's ugly. Did you tell her that? That she disappointed you? Perhaps not in so many words. But she knew. Women always know. He set down his pen. We'd been married 3 years when I wrote the first version of what you found. The manuscript about the perfect Laura. I told myself it was fiction, a thought experiment. But she found it, and she understood what it really was, a blueprint for her replacement. Her wish list for the woman I wanted instead of the one I had. And she confronted you. Violently. We had the worst fight of our marriage. She accused me of never really loving her, just the idea of her. And she was right. I'd fallen in love with my own construction, with the character I'd created based on her but not actually her. And when the real woman couldn't sustain that fiction, I became bitter, cruel in subtle ways, withdrew emotionally, made her feel like she was failing at being herself. Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. Is that what you're doing with me? Creating another construction? Another idealized Laura, who will eventually disappoint you too. No? Adrian stood, moved to the window. That's what I'm trying not to do. That's why I'm being transparent about the process. Why I'm showing you the manuscripts, the research, the whole apparatus of my obsession. So you can see it for what it is and decide whether you want to be part of it anyway. With my wife, I hid everything. I pretended the character I'd created was genuine feeling. I lied to both of us. But with me, you're just being upfront about the manipulation. Is it manipulation if you know exactly what's happening? If you're a willing participant in your own narrative construction? He turned to face her. I think that's what makes this different, Laura. We're co-authors this time. You have as much power over the story as I do. She wanted to believe that. God, she wanted to believe that. But she'd spent 15 years with a man who'd convinced her she had power right up until the moment she tried to use it. She knew how easy it was to mistake permission for agency, how quickly co-authoring could turn into following someone else's outline. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer honestly. Did you kill her, your wife? The silence that followed was so profound, Laura could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the rain against the windows, could hear the old building settling around them. Adrian didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show any visible reaction to the question. He just stood there, backlit by the window, his face half in shadow. The police said it was an accident, he said finally. That's not what I asked. No, I didn't kill her. Not with my hands. Not directly, he paused. But did I create the conditions that led to her death? Did I push her toward that staircase with my emotional cruelty and impossible expectations? Probably. Almost certainly. So am I responsible? Yes. Am I a murderer? Legally, no. Morally. He shrugged. That depends on your definition. Laura's throat felt tight. She should leave. Right now. Walk out of this house and never come back. Because this was the confession, wasn't it? The moment when the villain revealed himself and the protagonist ran. That's how this scene was supposed to go. But she didn't move. Because beneath her fear, beneath her very reasonable desire to flee, there was something else. A dark curiosity. A need to understand. If Adrian had contributed to his wife's death through psychological manipulation, what did that make Laura? Was she walking the same path? Or was she, as he suggested, writing a different story entirely? I'm not going to fall down the stairs, she said quietly. I know you're not. Because I see you. I see what you're doing. And I'm choosing to be here anyway. Exactly. Adrian moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. That's the difference. That's what makes you extraordinary. You're not a victim walking into a trap. You're a participant entering an experiment. You know the risks and you're taking them with open eyes. Or, I'm just better at rationalizing my own self-destruction. Maybe, or maybe you understand, something most people don't, that the only way out of a story is through it. That unfinished narratives haunt us forever. That the only way to be free of the past is to give it a proper ending. His hand came up, brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, and Laura felt her breath catch. This was the first time he'd touched her beyond those brief, accidental contacts in the office. The first time he'd crossed the invisible line they'd been dancing around for weeks. I want to kiss you, he said. But I won't unless you ask me to. Because that's how this works. You lead, you choose. You tell me what you want from this story. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a test, a manipulation, another layer of the game. But her body didn't care about rationality. Her body was responding to the heat in his voice, the intensity in his dark eyes, the promise of something that felt dangerously close to desire. "What if I don't know what I want?" "Then we wait until you do." But he didn't step back, didn't create distance. Just stood there, close enough to kiss, waiting for her decision. Laura thought about her ex-husband who'd never waited for anything, who'd taken what he wanted when he wanted it, and called it love, who'd made her feel like her desires were inconvenient obstacles to be overcome or ignored. And here was Adrian, with all his darkness and obsession and psychological games, giving her something her ex never had: choice. "Kiss me," she whispered. He did. Slowly, deliberately, like someone savoring a long-anticipated moment. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. And then his lips were on hers, warm and firm and tasting faintly of the whiskey he'd been drinking earlier. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was the kiss of someone who'd been imagining this moment for months, maybe years, and was finally allowed to make it real. Laura kissed him back. Let herself sink into it. Let herself feel the heat and hunger that had been building between them since that first accidentally sent photo. Let herself be wanted with this kind of fierce intensity. And for just a moment, she let herself forget all the red flags, all the warnings, all the very reasonable concerns about falling into bed with a man who'd admitted to psychologically tormenting his first wife to death. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. We're in it now. The real story. No more research phase. No more observation. This is where the plot actually begins. Then let's see where it goes." But even as she said it, Laura felt a flicker of doubt, because she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd just written herself into Adrian's narrative in a way that would be impossible to edit out later, and she had no idea how this chapter would end. The next morning, Laura arrived at work to find a package on her desk. No label, no return address, just a plain brown box tied with twine. She opened it carefully, half expecting, what? A gift from Adrian? Another manuscript? Some new piece of the puzzle? Instead, she found photographs. Dozens of them. Old ones, faded and creased, showing a young woman who looked eerily like Laura. Same coloring, same build, same way of holding herself. But the clothes were wrong, dated to maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And the settings were familiar. Surrey locations she recognized from her old life. Her old house. Her old neighborhood. Places she'd lived before she ever came to London. Her hands shook as she flipped through the images. There in the background of one photo, barely visible but unmistakable, was a younger version of herself. Maybe 16 or 17, walking past a cafe where this Laura doppelganger sat with friends. There was a note at the bottom of the box, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. Ask him about his wife's brother. Ask him what David knows. Ask him why she looks like you or why you look like her. But most importantly, ask yourself how long you've been part of this story. Laura's office phone rang. She answered mechanically, her mind still reeling from the photographs. "Laura Lee?" A man's voice, warm and vaguely familiar. "Yes, who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you. Someone who knows what Adrian is doing and wants to stop it before it's too late." A pause. "My name is David Thorne. I was married to Adrian's wife's sister. I've been watching you, Laura, and I think we need to talk." "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways. Look, I know this sounds insane. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to meet with me anyway, just once. Let me show you what Adrian isn't telling you. Let me explain why you're in danger." "I'm not in danger. You're in a relationship with a man who drove his wife to suicide and has been stalking you since before you even knew he existed. If that's not danger, I don't know what is." Laura's throat tightened. "He said it was an accident." He lied. Laura Thorne jumped from the second-floor landing deliberately after finding evidence that Adrian had been following a teenage girl, a girl who looked exactly like her, for years. A girl he planned to groom into his next obsession once Laura was gone. David's voice dropped. "That girl was you, Laura. He's been watching you for decades. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't fate. This is a long game, and you're about to lose." She ended the call, hands trembling too badly to hold the phone. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Adrian had been honest about his obsession, about his research, about the manuscript. He'd shown her everything, hadn't he? But then she remembered the photographs in the box. The impossible coincidence of looking so much like the first Laura. The way Adrian had found her, hired her, shaped her into exactly what he wanted. What if it hadn't started 6 months ago? What if it had started years ago, back when she was just a teenager in Surrey, who happened to look like a lonely man's dead wife? Laura grabbed her bag and left the office without a word to anyone. She had to think. She had to figure out what was real and what was fiction. She had to... Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Camden Market, the vintage bookstall. 1 hour, come alone. I have proof. She shouldn't go. She should go to the police or HR, or literally anyone in authority who could help her make sense of this nightmare. But instead, she found herself on the tube heading north, the photographs burning a hole in her bag. Because if there was even a chance that David was telling the truth, she had to know. She had to understand the full story before she could decide what to do next. Camden Market was crowded, even on a Tuesday afternoon. Tourists and locals browsing the stalls, the smell of street food mixing with incense and old leather. Laura found the vintage bookstall easily. A cramped space packed with moldy paperbacks and first editions behind protective plastic. A man stood there, early 40s, sandy hair, wearing a waxed jacket despite the mild weather. He looked up as she approached, and something in his eyes made her stomach drop. Recognition, sadness, fear. "Laura," he said softly. "Thank you for coming. You're David?" "David Chambers. I took my wife's surname after we married. Before that, I was David Ashford." He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of a woman who could have been Laura's sister. Dark hair, amber eyes, delicate features. "This was my wife, Eliza, Adrian's sister-in-law. She killed herself 3 years ago. Carbon monoxide in a locked garage. Left a note that said only, 'I'm sorry I couldn't be her.'" Laura's vision swam. "I don't understand. Adrian doesn't just do this to romantic partners. He does it to everyone close to him. My wife spent years trying to live up to her sister's memory, trying to be the perfect Laura that Adrian had idealized after his wife's death. And when she couldn't, when she failed to match this impossible standard, he withdrew his approval, his affection, his attention. He did to her psychologically what he'd done to his wife. And it killed her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're next. Because I've been tracking Adrian's obsessions for years now, trying to understand why he destroys the women around him. And I've discovered something horrifying." David pulled out a folder, much like the one Adrian had shown Laura weeks ago. "He's been planning this for a long time, longer than you can imagine." He opened the folder. Inside were school records, medical files, even therapy notes, all dated 15 to 20 years ago. All with Laura's name. Laura Brennan before she married, before she became Laura Lee. "How did you get these?" "I'm a journalist. Or I was, before this became my full-time obsession. I've been investigating Adrian since my wife died, trying to build a case. And what I found," he shook his head, "he's been watching you since you were 15 years old. Since he first saw you in Surrey during a book signing. You attended with your school. Do you remember?" She did, vaguely. A field trip to a bookstore where some famous author was speaking. She'd been bored, more interested in the boy she'd liked at the time than anything the speaker had said. But she'd gotten a book signed. She'd stood in line and... "He was the author," Laura whispered. 22 years ago. You were 15. He was 31 and newly married to the first Laura, but he saw you in that line. And according to his journals, which I've read, stolen from his house during the funeral, he became convinced you were the true Laura, the one he should have met first, the one who would have prevented all his mistakes. The world tilted. Laura grabbed the bookstall for support. "That's impossible. People don't... You can't just fixate on a teenager for decades and... You can if you're rich enough, connected enough, and obsessed enough." He followed your life, Laura, from a distance at first. Made sure you attended a university near London. Arranged for certain opportunities to come your way, certain obstacles to appear at convenient times. Even your marriage. Did you ever wonder why a man like Martin Brennan, with his rage issues and controlling tendencies, seemed to show up exactly when you were most vulnerable? When you'd just lost your parents and needed someone to lean on? Laura's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a crate of books, her mind racing. "Adrian arranged my marriage?" "Not directly. But he understood narrative, remember? He understood how to create conditions that would lead you down certain paths. He knew that if you married someone abusive, you'd eventually leave. That you'd come to London alone, damaged, ready to be remade, ready to be his. This is insane. You're insane. This is the truth. David crouched in front of her, his eyes desperate. I know how it sounds. I know it's too much to believe. But look at the evidence, Laura. Look at the timeline. Look at how perfectly everything has worked out to bring you to exactly where he wanted you. This isn't a romance. It's not even a twisted love story. It's a decades-long grooming operation by a man with unlimited resources and zero conscience. She wanted to argue. She wanted to call him a liar, a conspiracy theorist, a jealous ex-relative with an axe to grind. But the photographs in her bag, the ones showing her teenage self in the background of images of the first Laura, told a different story. Her story where she'd been part of Adrian's narrative long before she'd known Adrian existed. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Help me stop him. Help me expose what he's doing before he drives you to, the same fate as my wife, as his wife, as all the others. You're strong, Laura. You survived an abusive marriage. You rebuilt yourself. You can survive this too, but only if you're willing to fight. I don't know if I want to fight. David's expression crumbled. What? Maybe, Laura stood, her mind spinning with possibilities. Maybe this is what I want. Maybe being part of someone's grand narrative is better than being lost in my own meaningless life. Maybe, no. David grabbed her shoulders. Listen to yourself. That's exactly what he wants you to think. That's the Stockholm Syndrome talking. That's the manipulation working. You're not thinking clearly because he's been inside your head for months, maybe years, shaping how you see yourself and your choices. Or maybe I'm thinking clearly for the first time in my life. She pulled away. Maybe I'm tired of being the victim of other people's stories. Maybe I want to be the protagonist of this one, even if it's dangerous, even if it doesn't end well. It will end with your death. Everything ends with death eventually. At least this way it'll mean something. She walked away before David could respond, her heart hammering, her mind a chaos of thoughts and fears and dark, seductive possibilities. Because he was right about one thing. She wasn't thinking clearly, but she also wasn't sure she wanted to. Clarity meant seeing the manipulation for what it was. Clarity meant walking away from the most intense relationship she'd ever had. Clarity meant returning to the small, safe, meaningless life she'd been living before Adrian. And maybe, just maybe, she'd rather burn than fade. Her phone rang as she exited the market. Adrian, of course. Where are you? His voice was tight with something that might have been concern or might have been anger. I met with David. A pause. I see. And what did he tell you? Hers two words in cousin, everything. The photographs. The timeline. The years of watching and planning and arranging. She stopped walking. Let the crowds flow around her. Is it true? Have you been orchestrating my life since I was 15? Yes. The simple admission knocked the breath from her lungs. Just like that? You're not even going to try to deny it. I told you I'd be honest with you, Laura. That was the deal. Complete transparency even when it's ugly. Yes, I saw you at that book signing. Yes, I became convinced you were meant to be part of my story. Yes, I've been watching and waiting, and occasionally nudging circumstances in directions that would eventually bring you to me. Does that make me a monster? Probably. Does it change what we have now? That depends on you. How can you say we have anything? How can any of this be real if you engineered all of it? Because you're here anyway. Because even knowing what I've done, even understanding the full scope of my obsession, you haven't run. You haven't gone to the police. You haven't burned my house down. You're still in the story, Laura. You're still choosing this. He was right. God help her, he was right. She could walk away right now. She could go to the authorities, expose everything, ruin him professionally and personally. But she wouldn't. Because despite everything, despite the manipulation, the stalking, the decades of psychological warfare, she wanted to see how this ended. She wanted to finish the story. Where are you? She asked. Home, waiting for you. There's something I need to show you. The final piece. The thing that will make you understand why all of this was necessary. I'll be there in an hour. She ended the call and stood there in the middle of Camden, people flowing around her like water around a stone, and wondered what the hell she was doing. What kind of woman walked knowingly into a trap? What kind of protagonist chose the dangerous path when the safe one was right there? But she already knew the answer. The kind of woman who'd been written into someone else's story so thoroughly that she'd forgotten how to write her own. The kind of woman who'd rather be a tragic heroine than a forgettable background character. The kind of woman who understood on some deep, dark level that the only way out was through. So she headed to the tube back toward Kensington, back toward Adrian, and whatever revelation waited for her in that beautiful, terrible house. Back toward the ending she'd been moving toward her entire life, whether she knew it or not. And as the train rumbled through the darkness, Laura finally understood what Adrian had been trying to tell her all along. Some stories choose their protagonists. Some narratives are so powerful, so all-consuming, that the only freedom is to embrace them completely, to stop fighting the plot, and let it carry you toward whatever conclusion it demands. She just hoped that conclusion wasn't written in blood. When Laura arrived at Adrian's townhouse, the door was already open, not thrown wide in welcome, but just slightly ajar, an invitation or a warning, she wasn't sure which. She pushed it open and stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. The house was dark except for a soft glow coming from upstairs. Adrian's study, she assumed. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a choice, like crossing another invisible line that would make retreat even more impossible. By the time she reached the landing, her hands were shaking. Adrian sat at his desk, backlit by a single lamp, looking like something out of a noir film. He didn't turn when she entered, just kept writing in that leather notebook he always carried. The scratch of pen on paper was the only sound in the room. "Close the door," he said quietly. She did. The click of the latch sounded final. Sit. There was a chair positioned directly across from his desk, not the comfortable armchair she usually used, but a straight-backed wooden one that felt almost penitential. She sat. Adrian finished whatever he was writing, set down his pen with deliberate care, and finally looked at her. His eyes were darker than usual, shadowed by something Laura couldn't quite read. Exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. "David told you everything," he said. "It wasn't a question. He told me you've been watching me since I was 15, that you orchestrated my entire adult life to bring me here. That I'm not a coincidence, I'm a culmination." Laura's voice was steadier than she felt. "Is there anything he missed?" "A few details, but the broad strokes are accurate." Adrian opened a drawer, pulled out another folder, thicker than the one he'd shown her before. "This is everything. Every photograph, every note, every moment I documented over the past 22 years. I was going to show you eventually." David just accelerated the timeline. He slid the folder across the desk. Laura stared at it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it would confirm. But eventually her curiosity won out. It always did. Inside were hundreds of pages, photographs of her at different ages, 15, 18, 23, 30, always from a distance, always without her knowledge. Notes about her habits, her friends, her jobs, detailed analyses of her handwriting, her speech patterns, her body language. It was comprehensive and horrifying and intimate in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're sick," she whispered. "Yes," Adrian agreed simply. "I am. I've always been sick. The only question is whether you can live with that sickness, or whether it will destroy you the way it destroyed the others." "Why me? Of all the women in the world who might have looked like your wife, why fixate on a 15-year-old girl you saw for 30 seconds at a book signing?" "Because you looked at me." His voice was soft but intense. "Everyone else that day, they looked through me, past me, seeing only the public persona, the successful author, the literary celebrity. But you looked at me like you could see something underneath, something broken and desperate and hungry. And I thought, there's someone who understands, someone who knows what it's like to be a narrative construction instead of a real person." Even at 15, you had that quality, that sense of performing yourself. Laura remembered that day now, pulled it from the depths of memory. She'd been having a terrible year. Her father had just been diagnosed with cancer. Her mother was falling apart. She'd felt like she was drowning in other people's emotions, forced to be the strong one, the stable one, the one who held everything together. And yes, when she'd reached the front of that signing line, she'd looked at Adrian Thorne, not yet the reclusive millionaire, but an up-and-coming novelist with haunted eyes, and she'd seen something familiar. A fellow performer, a fellow fake. So you decided to groom me, she said flatly. No, I decided to wait for you. There's a difference. Adrian stood, moved to the window. I didn't contact you. I didn't try to insert myself into your life. I just watched, documented, made sure you survived to become who you needed to become. And occasionally, very occasionally, I removed obstacles that might have prevented that. Like what? Your ex-husband was planning to kill you. The words were delivered with such casualness that for a moment Laura didn't process them. 3 months before you left him, he'd bought a gun, had been researching how to make it look like a suicide. I found out through a private investigator I'd hired to monitor your safety, so I made sure certain information reached the police. An anonymous tip about the illegal weapon, about his history of violence. He was arrested, the gun was confiscated, and you left him before he could try again with a different method. Laura's vision swam. You saved my life. I preserved my investment, Adrian corrected. Don't romanticize it. I didn't do it out of altruism. I did it because I'd spent 15 years watching you grow into exactly the woman I needed, and I wasn't going to let some small-minded brute destroy that. She should be grateful. She should thank him for intervening, for preventing what might have been her murder. But instead she felt violated in a new and profound way, because even her escape, her moment of agency, her decision to finally leave, had been facilitated by Adrian's manipulation. Nothing was hers. Not her choices, not her survival, not even her own life. I want to go home, she said. No, you don't. You want to see what I've built for you. You want to know what comes next in the story. Adrian turned from the window. I have a project, something that will require your participation, something that will help you understand why all of this was necessary. I don't want to participate in anything. Then leave. Right now. Walk out that door and never come back. Go to the police if you want. Expose everything. Ruin me. I won't stop you. He met her gaze. But we both know you won't. Because despite everything, despite the stalking and the manipulation, and the 22 years of obsession, you're curious. You want to know how this ends. You want to be part of something bigger than yourself, even if that something is dark and twisted and possibly fatal. He was right. God damn him, he was right. Laura stood, grabbed her bag, walked to the door, put her hand on the knob, stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her like water. Then she turned around. Show me, she said. Adrian's smile was small and sad, and almost relieved. He moved to a cabinet in the corner, unlocked it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, and pulled out a manuscript. This one was different from the others, professionally bound with a cover design and everything. He handed it to her. The title read, The Unfinished Life of Laura Thorne, a Memoir. Your wife wrote this? She started it. 3 years into our marriage, when things were already falling apart. She thought if she could understand herself better, articulate her own narrative, she might be able to save us. But she never finished it. The last third of the book is blank pages. A life story with no ending. Laura opened the manuscript, flipped through it. The handwriting was elegant and sad, the words raw and honest. Laura Thorne had written about her childhood, her dreams, her marriage to Adrian, about the slow realization that she was living inside someone else's fantasy, about the creeping fear that she was disappearing, being erased by her husband's need to idealize her. It was devastating. It was also eerily familiar. Why are you showing me this? Because Thorne Publishing is going to release it. A posthumous memoir by my late wife, finally completed after all these years. Adrian's voice was careful, controlled. And I want you to finish writing it. I want you to complete her story, using your own words, your own experiences. I want you to write the ending she never got to write. Laura's stomach dropped. That's insane. I can't write someone else's memoir. I can't pretend to be. You're not pretending. You're continuing. You're showing how one woman's unfinished story can be taken up by another. How narrative transcends individual lives. How all women living under the male gaze are, in some sense, writing the same story over and over. He paused. And then, once the manuscript is complete, you're going to narrate the audiobook. I want your voice reading her words. I want the two Lauras to merge completely. This was it. This was the ultimate violation he'd been building toward. Not just watching her, not just shaping her, but literally erasing the boundary between her and his dead wife. making them interchangeable, finishing his perfect Laura by combining the real one with the constructed one. "No," Laura said. "Absolutely not. I'll pay you £50,000 plus full co-author credit. Your name on the cover next to hers. I don't care about money. Then do it for understanding. Do it because you want to know what it felt like to be her. Do it because the only way to escape a narrative is to understand it completely from the inside out." Adrian moved closer. "You asked me earlier why fixate on one teenage girl out of millions of possibilities? The answer is because I saw in you what I'd lost in her, the ability to be both vulnerable and strong, broken and whole, a woman who could survive being written into someone else's story and still maintain her own identity. My wife couldn't do that. She let my narrative consume her completely. But I think you're strong enough to resist, to take what I'm offering and make it yours instead of the other way around. This isn't an offer. It's a trap. Maybe it's an opportunity, the chance to understand yourself through someone else's eyes, to see how your story connects to a larger narrative about women and control and the violence of being perceived." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "I'm not asking you to disappear, Laura. I'm asking you to expand, to contain multitudes, to be big enough to hold both your story and hers." She wanted to pull away. She wanted to slap him, scream at him, tell him exactly what she thought of his grandiose justifications for psychological abuse. But his touch was warm and his eyes were intense, and some broken part of her, the part that had spent 15 years with a man who only touched her in anger, craved even this twisted form of intimacy. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want something in return. Name it. Complete access to everything. Every note, every photograph, every manuscript you've ever written about me or her or any of the others. No more secrets. No more reveals. I want to see the entire apparatus so I can decide whether I'm participating in art or enabling abuse." "Agreed. And I want David left alone. Whatever he's planning, whatever investigation he's conducting, you leave him alone. No legal action, no intimidation, nothing." Adrian's jaw tightened. "He's trying to destroy me. Then let him try. If your narrative is as powerful as you claim, it should be able to withstand external critique. And if it can't, if the whole thing falls apart the moment someone shines a light on it, then maybe it deserves to be destroyed." For a long moment, Adrian just looked at her. Then slowly he nodded. "All right, David Chambers can investigate all he wants. I won't interfere. Do you promise?" "I promise." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "Now do you promise? Will you help me finish this?" Laura thought about walking away. She thought about the life she could have if she just left. Safe, small, forgettable. She thought about David's warnings, about his dead wife who'd tried to be someone she wasn't and paid with her life. She thought about the first Laura falling down the stairs, her story ending mid-sentence. And then she thought about her own unfinished narrative, her marriage that had ended not with resolution, but with escape. Her attempt to rebuild herself that had led only to this strange mirror house where she couldn't tell which reflection was real. Maybe Adrian was right. Maybe the only way out was through. Maybe she had to finish someone else's story before she could begin her own. "I'll do it," she whispered. Adrian kissed her then, hard and hungry and claiming. And Laura kissed him back, tasting triumph and defeat in equal measure, wondering which one she'd ultimately feel when this was all over. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Adrian gave Laura access to everything. Decades of notebooks, files, photographs, manuscripts. She spent her days at Thorne Publishing, maintaining her cover as his assistant, and her nights in his study, immersed in the archive of his obsession. It was overwhelming and disturbing and strangely addictive. Like reading a novel where she was simultaneously the protagonist and the audience. The manuscript of Laura Thorne's memoir was the hardest part. Reading it felt like looking into a dark mirror. Laura Thorne had been so young when she married Adrian, only 24, fresh out of university, working as an editorial intern at the publishing house when he'd noticed her. She'd been flattered by his attention, seduced by his intensity, convinced that being chosen by such a brilliant man meant she was special. But the specialness had curdled quickly. Adrian's love had been conditional, contingent on her meeting impossible standards of perfection. She had to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, think certain thoughts. And whenever she failed, whenever the real woman peeked through the construct he'd created, he withdrew, went cold. Made her feel like she'd committed some unforgivable sin by being human. The memoir detailed it all with painful honesty. The way she'd started editing herself, censoring her thoughts, performing the role of perfect wife even when they were alone. The way she'd lost touch with her friends, her family, her own desires. The way she'd become a ghost haunting her own life, more idea than person. And then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. Laura Thorne had found the manuscript, the one where Adrian described his ideal woman, the Laura he'd been trying to create. And she'd realized that she'd been cast in a role without ever auditioning for it. That Adrian hadn't fallen in love with her, but with his own construction, and she'd been fool enough to try to become it. The last entry before the blank pages was dated 2 weeks before her death. I don't know who I am anymore. When I look in the mirror, I see his version of me looking back. His Laura, not mine. I need to end this, but I don't know how. How do you kill a character without dying yourself? Laura set down the manuscript, her hands shaking. This was what Adrian wanted her to finish. This suicide note disguised as a memoir. This cry for help that had come too late. She should refuse. She should tell Adrian that she wouldn't be complicit in turning his wife's tragedy into art. But instead, she found herself picking up a pen. Found herself writing in the blank pages. Found herself continuing the story. But perhaps that's the wrong question, she wrote in Laura Thorne's voice. Or was it her own voice now? Perhaps the question isn't how to kill the character without dying, but how to become real despite the fiction. How to reclaim your own narrative, even when someone else has been writing it all along. She wrote for hours. Wrote about what it felt like to be seen so intensely that you disappeared under the weight of observation. Wrote about the seduction of being someone's obsession, the dark thrill of mattering that much. Wrote about the slow realization that you can't actually live inside a narrative, that stories are meant to be told, not inhabited. And then she wrote about escape. About the choice to walk away from a story that would only end in tragedy. About the courage it took to leave an unfinished narrative unfinished, to resist the tyranny of resolution. When she finally stopped, dawn was breaking outside the windows. Adrian stood in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You changed the ending," he said quietly. "I gave her the ending she deserved. Not the one you wanted." "And what ending is that?" Laura held up the final pages. She leaves. She walks out of this house and never comes back. She chooses an uncertain future over a certain tragedy. She refuses to be a martyr to your narrative. Adrian crossed the room, took the pages from her hand, read them slowly. When he finished, he set them down with a strange gentleness. "That's not what happened. No, but it's what should have happened. And maybe if she reads this, if she hears me speak these words in the audiobook, it'll give her peace, wherever she is, whatever part of her still exists. You don't believe in an afterlife. I believe in narrative, and narratives have power beyond the lives that generate them. If I can give her a better ending, even retroactively, even fictionally, then maybe that's worth something." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her to her feet, kissed her forehead with something that almost felt like tenderness. "Record it," he said. "Record the audiobook with your ending. Let's see what happens." The recording studio was in the basement of Adrian's townhouse, a small, soundproofed room that felt like a confession booth. Laura had never done voice work before, but Adrian assured her she'd be fine. "Just read it naturally," he said through the intercom, "like you're telling the story to a friend, like you're trying to make them understand." She started recording. The first few chapters were hard. Hearing Laura Thorne's words in her own voice created a disorienting feedback loop where she couldn't tell which Laura was speaking. But gradually she found a rhythm, found a way to honor the original Laura while also asserting her own presence. The sections about the marriage were particularly difficult. Reading about Adrian's manipulations, his calculated cruelties, his moments of tenderness that only made the cruelty worse, all while he sat on the other side of the glass listening, felt like a form of testimony. Like she was witnessing against him, even as she collaborated with him. But the worst part was reading her own additions. The final chapters where she'd written Laura Thorne's escape, her reclamation of self. Because as she spoke those words, she realized they weren't really about Laura Thorne at all. They were about her. They were the ending she wished she could write for herself, but didn't know how to reach. "I'm walking out the door now," she read, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm leaving the man who made me forget myself. I'm choosing uncertainty over control, chaos over narrative, life over art. And I don't know what comes next. I don't know who I'll be without his gaze shaping me. But I'm going to find out. I'm going to write my own story, messy and unfinished and completely mine." She stopped, looked up at Adrian through the glass. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Keep going," he said through the intercom. "That's the end. That's where I stopped writing. Then write more, now ad-lib. Finish it." Laura's throat tightened. "I don't know how it ends." "Then make something up. That's what writers do. We lie our way toward truth." She took a breath, let it out slowly, and started speaking without the manuscript in front of her. Just words flowing from some deep wounded place inside her. "The hardest part isn't leaving," she said. "It's believing you deserve to. It's undoing all the years of conditioning that told you his version of you was better than your own. It's learning to trust your own perception again. To believe that your story matters even if no one's watching, even if no one's documenting it, even if it never becomes art. Because here's what I finally understood. Being the subject of someone's obsession doesn't make you special. It makes you a victim. And the only way to stop being a victim is to walk away from the narrative that victimizes you, even if that narrative promises meaning, even if it promises love, even if it promises that your pain will be transformed into something beautiful. Because beauty built on suffering is just suffering with better aesthetics. And I deserve more than that. We all do." The recording room fell silent. Laura sat there, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face. She'd never said any of that out loud before, had barely let herself think it. But once the words were out, she couldn't take them back. Adrian's voice came through the intercom, very quiet. "Come upstairs." She did, legs shaking, not sure what she'd find. Adrian stood in the living room, the completed manuscript in his hands. He looked older somehow, diminished, like she'd stolen something vital from him. "You're leaving," he said. "Not a question." "I don't know." "Yes, you do. That's what the ending you wrote means. That's what you were trying to tell yourself by putting those words in her mouth. You're done with this, with me, with the whole project." Laura wanted to deny it, but she couldn't because he was right. Somewhere in the process of writing Laura Thorne's escape, she'd written her own, had given herself permission to walk away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. This is what I wanted. Not consciously, maybe, but underneath everything, the research, the manipulation, the years of planning, this is what I was trying to create. A woman strong enough to leave me, a Laura who would survive my narrative instead of being consumed by it." "I don't understand." Adrian set down the manuscript, moved to the window. "My wife didn't jump, Laura, she fell. During an argument, yes. While we were fighting about my obsessions, yes. But it was an accident. A terrible, stupid accident. And I've spent 10 years trying to rewrite that ending. Trying to give her agency she didn't have in life. Trying to make her death mean something by turning it into a choice, a sacrifice, a narrative event. But you," he turned to face her, "you're giving her something better. You're giving her the ending where she escapes, where she survives, where she becomes more than just my victim. By becoming her," Laura's voice was sharp, "by finishing her story for her. That doesn't save her, Adrian. That erases her even more completely. Maybe, or maybe it honors her. Maybe the best way to commemorate the dead is to let them continue through us, to carry their unfinished stories forward and complete them in ways they couldn't. That's just more justification for your obsession." "Probably." His smile was sad. "But it's also true. You can't save Laura Thorne. She's gone, but you can save yourself. You can walk out of here with your identity intact, your story your own, your future unwritten. And maybe that. Maybe you escaping what she couldn't. Maybe that's the real ending we've been building toward all along." Laura stared at him. This man who'd shaped her life for 22 years without her knowledge, who'd saved her and trapped her and loved her in the most twisted way imaginable. And she realized something that made her chest ache with its truth. She did love him. Not despite his darkness, but because of it. Because he'd seen her completely, every broken part, every desperate need, and hadn't looked away. But love wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Not for Laura Thorne, not for David's wife, not for any of the women who'd tried to be what Adrian needed. Love without autonomy was just another kind of prison. I'm going to publish the audiobook, she said finally, with my ending. And then I'm going to resign from Thorne Publishing. And then, she paused, choosing her words carefully, then I'm going to figure out who I am without you watching. How long will that take? I don't know. Maybe forever. Maybe I'll never figure it out. But I need to try. Adrian nodded slowly. And if you come back, after you've figured it out, after you know who you are independent of my influence, would there be room in your story for me then? It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him. This powerful man, this architect of other people's lives, asking if he might someday be allowed into hers. The question should have made her angry. Should have confirmed everything David had said about manipulation and control, but instead, it made her sad. Because she could see what Adrian couldn't, that his need to control the narrative came from his own fear of being insignificant, that all his research and planning and manipulation was just a desperate attempt to matter, to leave a mark, to prove that his life meant something beyond its own boundaries. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe, if you can learn to love someone without trying to write them, if you can accept that people are messier than characters, more contradictory, less resolved, if you can live with ambiguity instead of always needing a clear ending, that's a lot of ifs. Yes, Laura agreed, but that's what real life is. Just a series of ifs and maybes and unfinished narratives. Not everything gets to be art, Adrian. Sometimes things are just things. She left that evening taking only what she'd brought, her bag, her phone, the copy of Laura Thorne's manuscript with her additions. Adrian didn't try to stop her, didn't make any grand gestures or final pleas, just watched from the window as she walked away, becoming smaller and smaller until she disappeared around the corner. Laura went back to her flat, sat on her bed and cried. Not because she'd lost something, but because she'd gained it. For the first time in her adult life, maybe for the first time ever, she was alone with herself, unwatched, undocumented, free to be messy and uncertain and completely, ordinarily human. It was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. I heard you're out. I'm glad. If you need anything, a place to stay, someone to talk to, help with the next steps, I'm here. She stared at the message for a long time, remembering what Adrian had said about David, about him being her literature teacher in secondary school, about there being photographs of teenage Laura among the first Laura's possessions, about how David had known her long before he'd appeared in Camden Market with his warnings and his evidence. She typed back, How long have you been watching me, David? The response came quickly. Not as long as Adrian, but long enough. We need to talk. There are things about your past you still don't know. Things Adrian couldn't tell you because he doesn't know them himself. Laura deleted the message, blocked his number, because she was done. Done with men who claimed to be protecting her while controlling her. Done with narratives that required her to be someone's subject instead of her own author. Done with the whole twisted dance. She picked up the manuscript, turned to those blank pages at the end where she'd written Laura Thorne's escape, and added one final line. And then she learned to live without needing an ending. It wasn't profound. It wasn't even particularly good. But it was hers. And for now that was enough. 3 months passed in a strange limbo. Laura kept her word. She resigned from Thorne Publishing, found a new job at a small literary agency in Soho, where no one knew her story, where she was just another assistant, helping authors navigate the complex world of contracts and rights. It was mundane work, peaceful work, and for the first time in years Laura felt like she could breathe without someone analyzing the rhythm of her respiration. But she couldn't escape Adrian entirely. The audiobook launched in September to immediate controversy. Critics called it audacious, disturbing, and a troubling meditation on grief and obsession. The fact that Adrian's late wife's memoir had been completed by another woman, by someone who shared her name, and now her voice sparked heated debates about authorship, consent, and the ethics of posthumous publication. Laura watched it all from a distance, reading reviews on her phone during lunch breaks, seeing her name mentioned alongside Adrian's in articles that dissected their collaboration. Some praised her additions as a powerful feminist reclamation of narrative. Others condemned her as complicit in a dead woman's exploitation. Both were probably true. The publicity made her uncomfortable, but it also brought something unexpected. Other women started reaching out. Women who'd survived controlling relationships, who'd lost themselves in someone else's vision, who'd had to fight their way back to their own identities. They wrote to her through the publisher, through social media, through every channel they could find, telling her that hearing her voice, hearing Laura Thorne's words transformed into an escape narrative, had given them permission to leave their own destructive situations. One woman wrote, "I've listened to the audiobook 17 times. Every time you get to the part where she walks out the door, I cry. Because I did that too, 5 years ago. And I never knew if I made the right choice until I heard you say that being alone is better than being someone's creation. Thank you for finishing her story. Thank you for saving mine." Laura saved that email, printed it out, and kept it in her bedside drawer. On the nights when she wondered if she'd done the right thing, if leaving Adrian had been courage or cowardice, she'd read it and remember why unfinished narratives sometimes needed to stay unfinished. Why walking away could be its own form of completion. But she thought about him constantly, wondered what he was doing, whether he was working on new projects, whether he'd found another Laura to obsess over. She'd see men in expensive suits on the tube, and her heart would jump thinking it might be him. She'd pass the Bloomsbury office building where Thorne Publishing was headquartered and feel a pull so strong she'd have to force herself to keep walking. She missed him. Not the manipulation, not the control, but the intensity. The feeling of being seen so completely. The dark thrill of being someone's entire world, even if that world was unhealthy. Normal life, normal men, normal relationships, normal everything, felt bland by comparison. Like eating plain toast after years of rich, complicated food. David tried to contact her repeatedly, despite the block. He left messages with her new employer, sent letters to her flat, even showed up once at a coffee shop near her office. Each time Laura ignored him. She didn't trust his motives, didn't believe his concern was genuine. Men who claimed to be saving you while violating your privacy weren't saviors. They were just another kind of cage. But in late November, something changed. Laura received a package at her flat. No return address, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with red wax like something from another century. Inside was a leather journal, old and worn, filled with handwriting she didn't recognize. A note was tucked inside the front cover. "This belonged to your mother. I thought you should have it. There are things about your family, about your past, that Adrian never discovered. Things that explain why you were always meant to be part of this story. Read it. Then decide if you still want to run from your own narrative. D." Laura's hands shook as she opened the journal. Her mother had died 6 years ago, cancer, and Laura had inherited almost nothing. A few pieces of jewelry, some photographs, her mother's recipe collection, but never this. Never a journal. The entries dated back to before Laura was born. Her mother, writing about her own life, her own struggles, and there, buried in passages about mundane domestic concerns, was a confession that made Laura's blood run cold. Met with Adrian Thorne today. He doesn't know who I really am, of course. Doesn't know that Laura Ashford, his precious wife's sister, was my university roommate. Doesn't know that when she told me about her troubled marriage, about her husband's obsessions, about the young girl he'd become fixated on at a book signing, I made a promise. I promised I'd watch over that girl. Make sure she survived to adulthood. Make sure she became strong enough to either save herself or save him. I don't know which yet, but I owe Laura that much. She saved me once in ways Adrian will never understand. And if watching over her daughter, over young Laura Brennan, is how I repay that debt, then so be it. Laura read the passage 3 times, her mind refusing to process the implications. Her mother had known about Adrian's obsession before Laura herself had any idea. Had been part of this story not as a victim or a bystander, but as an active participant, a guardian, a conspirator. She flipped through more pages, finding scattered references to the project, to phone calls with someone named Eliza, David's late wife, she realized with growing horror, to plans for ensuring the narrative reaches its proper conclusion. Her mother hadn't just known about Adrian's fixation, she'd been facilitating it, making sure Laura stayed in Surrey near enough to be monitored. making sure she attended that specific university. Even, it seemed, encouraging her relationship with Martin, her abusive ex-husband. "Martin is perfect," one entry read, "controlling enough to break her down, but not clever enough to keep her broken. She'll leave him eventually, and when she does, she'll be exactly what Adrian needs, damaged but not destroyed, strong enough to resist him, but wounded enough to understand him. It's cruel what we're doing, but Laura Thorne wanted this, wanted her story to continue through someone else. And I promised her it would." Laura's vision swam. Her entire life, every choice, every relationship, every moment of suffering had been engineered. Not just by Adrian, but by her own mother, by David's wife, by the first Laura herself, apparently, who'd somehow orchestrated her own replacement before her death. She was going to be sick. She ran to the bathroom, dry heaving over the toilet, her body rejecting the truth faster than her mind could process it. When the nausea finally passed, she sat on the cold tile floor and let herself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from some primal place she'd been trying to ignore for months. Everything was a lie. Every moment of agency she'd thought she had, every choice she'd believed was hers. It was all script, all narrative, all part of a story written by dead women and obsessed men who thought they had the right to author other people's lives. Her phone rang. She answered without looking, her voice raw. "What?" "Laura." David's voice gentle and sad. "You got the journal. You bastard, you knew. You knew about my mother, about all of it, and you still pretended to be trying to save me." "I was trying to save you. That's what we've all been trying to do. In our own broken, fucked up ways. Save you from becoming what Laura Thorne became. Save you from losing yourself completely. By manipulating my entire life. By treating me like a character instead of a person." Yes, his honesty was almost as shocking as the revelation, because that's what your mother asked us to do. That's what Laura Thorne wanted. She knew she was dying, not physically, not then, but emotionally. She knew Adrian was erasing her, and she couldn't fight him alone. She wasn't strong enough, but she thought maybe if she could find someone who was, someone who could be trained and prepared and made ready, that person might succeed where she failed, might survive him, might even save him. "I'm not a weapon you can forge and aim at your enemies. No, you're not. You're a woman who deserves to make her own choices, which is why I'm telling you all this now at the end, when the story is almost over, so you can decide with full knowledge, with complete understanding, what your ending looks like." Laura's laugh was bitter. "What ending?" "There's no ending. There's just more manipulation. More layers of conspiracy, more dead women using me as their proxy. Or there's the truth, which is that everyone involved in this, your mother, my wife, Laura Thorne herself, they all believed in you. They saw something in you that was worth protecting, worth cultivating, worth fighting for. They saw someone who could take all this darkness and transform it into something else. Not redemption exactly, but understanding, completion, a way forward. Adrian doesn't know about any of this, does he? About my mother, about the conspiracy? No. He thinks he's been orchestrating everything alone. He has no idea that while he was watching you, we were watching him, making sure his obsession stayed manageable, making sure he never crossed the line from research into actual violence. And the gun. The one my ex-husband bought? Adrian said he tipped off the police. He did. But I told him about the gun. I'd been monitoring your marriage, saw the danger signs and fed Adrian the information, knowing he'd act on it, knowing he'd save you because he needed you alive. I used his obsession to protect you, Laura, we all did. She should hang up, should block him again and never look back. But instead she heard herself ask, why? Why do all of this? Why dedicate years of your lives to some elaborate plan to what? Fix Adrian Thorne. Complete a dead woman's narrative. Because we loved her. David's voice cracked. All of us in different ways. Your mother loved her like a sister. I loved her actual sister, who died trying to be what Laura Thorne couldn't, and we couldn't save her. Couldn't stop her from falling down those stairs, from giving up on life, from letting Adrian's narrative consume her. But we could try to make her death mean something. Could try to ensure that the next Laura, you, would be strong enough to survive what she couldn't. That's insane. Yes, it is, but so is everything else about this situation. So is Adrian's 22-year obsession. So is the fact that you're still in love with him despite knowing exactly what he is. So is the fact that I'm still trying to complete my dead wife's mission, even though she's been gone for 3 years. We're all insane, Laura. The only question is whether our insanity can create something meaningful, or whether it's just more destruction. Laura closed her eyes, leaned her head against the bathroom wall. What do you want from me, David? I want you to go back to him. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What? Go back to Adrian, not as his victim, not as his creation, but as his equal, as someone who knows the full truth and chooses him anyway. Because that's the only way this ends well. That's the only way any of us get peace. You've spent months trying to get me to leave him. Now you want me to go back? I wanted you to leave so you could learn to be yourself without him, so you could develop your own identity, your own agency, your own narrative. And you have. You've spent 3 months being Laura Lee, not Laura Thorne, not Adrian's construction, just yourself. Now you're ready to go back. Now you can choose him from a position of strength instead of weakness. And if I choose not to, if I decide that being alone is better than being part of this twisted story, then that's your choice, and we'll all accept it. But Laura, his voice softened, don't you want to know if it's possible? If two people who've been so broken by narrative can find something real together. If love can exist even in the most manipulated circumstances, your mother believed it could. Laura Thorne hoped it could. My wife died believing it could. Don't let their faith be for nothing. She ended the call, sat in the bathroom for another hour, the journal in her lap, trying to make sense of everything, trying to separate truth from fiction, manipulation from genuine care, love from obsession. Finally, when the sun began to set and her apartment filled with golden light, Laura made a decision. She went to her bedroom, opened her closet, and pulled out the dress she'd been saving. Dark green silk, elegant and simple, the kind of thing Adrian would appreciate. She showered, did her hair, put on makeup for the first time in months, made herself beautiful not because someone was watching, but because she wanted to. Because tonight, she was going to write her own ending. The Kensington townhouse looked the same as it had 3 months ago, pristine white facade, wrought iron balconies, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Laura stood on the doorstep for a long moment, her finger hovering over the bell, giving herself one last chance to walk away. Then she pressed it. Adrian answered almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He looked different, thinner, more tired, but also somehow more present. Less like a carefully constructed character, and more like an actual human being. He stared at her, speechless, and for a moment neither of them moved. I read my mother's journal, Laura said. I know everything now. The whole conspiracy, the decades of planning. The way everyone I loved was part of your story without me knowing. Laura, He stopped. I didn't know. About your mother, about the others. I thought I was alone in this. I thought it was just my obsession. I know. David told me. She stepped closer. But that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to blame you for things you didn't know about. I'm here because I've spent 3 months being alone, being myself, being completely free of your gaze. And I've realized something. What? I miss you. Not the manipulation, not the control, not the research or the manuscripts or the whole twisted apparatus of your obsession, but you, the man who looks at me like I'm the most fascinating thing in the world. The man who sees my darkness and doesn't run from it. The man who's just as broken as I am and doesn't pretend otherwise. Adrian's jaw tightened. You shouldn't miss me. You should hate me. I should do a lot of things. But I'm tired of should. I'm tired of living according to other people's narratives about what's healthy, or safe, or correct. I want to live according to my own story. And my story, the one I'm choosing, the one I'm writing for myself, includes you. Even knowing what I am? What I've done? Especially knowing that. Because you're the only person who's ever been honest about the ugliness, who's never pretended that love is pure or simple or uncomplicated, who's shown me that you can acknowledge the darkness and choose each other anyway. He reached for her then, pulled her inside, kissed her like a drowning man finding air. And Laura kissed him back, tasting desperation and relief and something that might almost be redemption. Not because he was saved or she was saved, but because they were choosing this, choosing each other, with full knowledge of the cost. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to love you without trying to write you. Then write me. But let me write you back. Let this be a collaboration instead of a monologue. Let me be a co-author instead of a character. What does that look like? I don't know yet. We'll have to figure it out as we go. But it means transparency, complete honesty. No more secrets, no more hidden manuscripts, no more research I don't know about. And it means I get to say no, get to establish boundaries, get to walk away if this becomes unhealthy again. And if I can't give you that, if my obsession is too strong, too all-consuming, then I'll leave. And this time it'll be forever. But Adrian, she cupped his face in her hands. I think you can. I think you've been trying to. I think the reason you've been so miserable these past 3 months is because you finally understand what you were doing wrong. You were trying to write a story instead of living a life. And stories need to end, but lives just keep going. He pulled her closer, buried his face in her neck. I thought I lost you. I thought you were gone forever, and I'd have to live with that for the rest of my life, knowing I'd created the perfect Laura and then driven her away because I couldn't stop being what I am. You didn't create me. My mother did, Laura Thorne did, David's wife did, maybe even I did. We're all authors of this story. You're just the one who's been taking all the credit. His laugh was wet with tears. That's fair. They went upstairs to his study, that room where so much of their strange courtship had taken place. But instead of sitting across from each other, researcher and subject, writer and character, they sat together on the worn leather couch, Laura's head on Adrian's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Tell me about the last 3 months, he said quietly. What you did, who you were when no one was watching. So she did. Told him about her new job, her small victories, the way she'd learned to be alone without being lonely. Told him about the women who'd reached out after the audiobook, about how strange it felt to be part of other people's stories in a positive way for once. Told him about the nights she'd almost texted him, almost shown up at his door, almost given up on independence because the freedom felt too vast and terrifying. And he told her about his 3 months, about the way he'd tried to work but couldn't focus, tried to start new projects but abandoned them because everything felt hollow without her there to witness it. About the manuscripts he'd burned, not all of them but some, the ones that felt too invasive, too manipulative. About the realization that he'd spent so much time trying to create the perfect Laura that he'd never actually tried to know the real one. I'm not perfect, Laura said. I'm messy and damaged, and I don't always make good choices. I'm probably making a bad choice right now coming back here. Probably, but it's your choice. That's what matters. Is it, though? Is any of this really my choice if my entire life has been engineered to bring me here? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, I think there's a difference between influence and determination. Yes, you were guided toward this moment, but you still had to choose to walk through my door tonight. You could have read that journal and decided to run. Could have heard David's explanation and rejected it. Could have spent the rest of your life being angry about the manipulation. But you didn't. You decided to come back. And that decision, that's yours. No one made it for you. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Believe that agency isn't about being free from all influence. That's impossible. It's about making conscious choices despite those influences. About understanding the forces shaping you and choosing whether to align with them or resist them. Laura lifted her head, looked at him. I'm going to keep my new job. I'm going to keep my flat. I'm not moving in here, not becoming your assistant again. If we do this, it's as equals, as partners. Not as employer and employee, not as writer and subject. Agreed. And I want you to see a therapist. A real one. Not just me listening to your confessions. Someone who can help you understand why you need to control narrative so badly. I'll try. Not try do, that's non-negotiable. All right. I'll do it. He brushed hair from her face. What else? I want to meet them, the other women, Catherine and anyone else who was part of your research. I want to apologize for being complicit in their objectification. And I want to hear their stories without your filter. Adrian flinched but nodded. That will be painful. For all of us. Good, pain means we're growing. Means we're breaking old patterns instead of repeating them. Anything else? Laura thought about it. About all the things she could demand. All the boundaries she could establish. But ultimately it came down to one thing. I need you to accept that this might fail. That even with all our best intentions, we might not be able to make this work. That sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes two broken people can't fix each other no matter how hard they try. I can accept that. Can you? Really? Because accepting failure means accepting an unfinished narrative, means living with ambiguity, means not having control over the ending. He pulled her closer, kissed the top of her head. You've already taught me that. The past 3 months not knowing if you'd ever come back, not being able to write my way to a resolution, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I survived it, and if this fails, if you leave again, I'll survive that too. It will hurt like hell, but I'll survive. And maybe that's growth. Maybe that's what Laura Thorne was trying to teach me all along, that you can love someone without consuming them, that you can let someone go and still be whole. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, not speaking, just breathing in sync. And for the first time in months, maybe for the first time ever, Laura felt something like peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of acceptance. The understanding that she was choosing this difficult, complicated, potentially destructive relationship with full awareness of the risks. Eventually, Adrian stood, pulled her to her feet. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her to a room she'd never been in before, a bedroom on the 3rd floor that had apparently been locked the entire time she'd been coming here. He opened it now, revealing a space that took her breath away. It wasn't decorated like the rest of the house. No expensive furniture, no perfect staging. Instead, it was full of art. Paintings, sculptures, sketches, all created by the same hand. Adrian's hand, she realized. I didn't know you painted, she said. I don't, or I didn't until you left. I needed to do something with my hands that wasn't writing, wasn't documentation, wasn't trying to control narrative. So I started painting, badly as you can see. But it helped. Laura walked through the room, studying the canvases. They were rough, untrained, but also raw and honest in a way Adrian's writing never was. Most of them were abstract, colors and shapes that suggested emotion without defining it. But some were portraits of her. Not idealized versions, but real ones. Laura sleeping. Laura laughing. Laura crying. Laura angry. All the faces she made when she thought no one was watching. When did you paint these? She asked quietly. From memory. From photographs I took with your permission before you left. I wanted to capture you as you actually are, not as I wanted you to be. It was an exercise in observation without control, looking without shaping. She stopped in front of one canvas that showed her standing at a window, backlit, her face in shadow. This one's my favorite. Mine too, because I can't see your expression, can't analyze what you're feeling. You're just a silhouette, a mystery. And I realize that's what love should be. Not solving someone like a puzzle, but appreciating the mystery, being okay with not knowing. Laura turned to him, saw the vulnerability in his face, and made a decision. Show me how to paint. Teach me how to look without controlling. They spent the rest of the night in that room, covered in paint, laughing and creating and making a mess of everything. Adrian showed her how to mix colors, how to let the brush move without trying to direct every stroke. And Laura showed him how to collaborate, how to build something together instead of alone. The painting they created was terrible, chaotic and clashing and completely uncoordinated. But it was theirs, a genuine collaboration. And when they finally stood back to look at it, both covered in paint, both exhausted and happy, Laura understood what David had meant. This was what the dead women had wanted. Not for her to save Adrian or for him to save her, but for them to find a way to create together, to merge their narratives without either one being consumed. As dawn broke over London, Laura and Adrian fell asleep on the floor of that art-filled room, wrapped in drop cloths, still covered in paint. And for the first time in either of their lives, there was no manuscript nearby, no notes, no documentation, no attempt to capture or control the moment. Just two damaged people choosing each other, choosing the mess, choosing to write a story with no guaranteed ending. In the weeks that followed, they found a rhythm. Laura kept her promise, maintained her job, her flat, her independence. But 3 nights a week, she came to Kensington. Sometimes they talked about the past, working through the trauma and manipulation with a painful honesty that left them both raw. Sometimes they created, paintings, stories, music, anything that required collaboration. And sometimes they just existed together, reading in comfortable silence, cooking meals, living the kind of ordinary life that neither had ever had. Adrian did start therapy, reluctantly at first, but then with genuine commitment when he realized how much damage his need for control had done. He learned words like attachment disorder and parasocial obsession, and slowly began to understand that his problems went deeper than just grief over his late wife. They were rooted in childhood, in his own experiences of being controlled, in a fear of insignificance so profound that he'd spent decades trying to write himself into mattering. Laura contacted the other women, Catherine and two others she hadn't known about. The meetings were painful. They were angry, understandably, that Laura had gotten what they'd been denied. Adrian's honesty, his growth, his attempt at change. But they also saw that Laura had paid a price they hadn't, had been manipulated from childhood, had lost her mother to the conspiracy, had her entire life arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Eventually, tentatively, they formed a kind of support group. Women who'd been Adrian's research subjects, learning to reclaim their narratives together. David stayed in the picture, though at a careful distance. He and Laura met once a month for coffee, where he'd update her on his investigation, which he'd closed finally, satisfied that Adrian was no longer a danger. They talked about their shared loss, her mother, his wife, the first Laura, and slowly built something like friendship. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The audiobook continued to sell. Thorn Publishing used the publicity to launch a whole series on unfinished narratives, memoirs and essays by people who'd had to complete someone else's story. It became a quiet success, helping people who'd lost loved ones or survived trauma, or simply needed to understand that not every story has a neat ending. And Laura learned to live in the ambiguity, learned that she could love Adrian without being consumed by him, learned that she could be part of his narrative while also maintaining her own, learned that the difference between a healthy relationship and a destructive one wasn't the absence of problems, but the willingness to address them honestly. 6 months after she'd walked back through his door, Adrian asked her to marry him, not with a grand gesture or a carefully orchestrated scene, but simply quietly over breakfast in her tiny kitchen. "I know it's complicated," he said. "I know my history with marriage is terrible. I know you have every reason to say no. But I want to try. I want to build something new with you. Not because you're a replacement for Laura Thorne, but because you're you. Because you challenge me and frustrate me and make me want to be better than I am." Laura looked at the ring, simple, elegant, nothing like what the first Laura had worn, and thought about all the reasons to say no. The manipulation, the stalking, the decades of orchestration, the dead women whose sacrifices had led to this moment. The very real possibility that this would all fall apart spectacularly. Then she thought about the last 6 months. The growth, the honesty, the collaboration. The way Adrian had learned to love her without trying to write her. The way she'd learned to be strong enough to leave if she needed to, but secure enough to stay. The way they'd built something imperfect and messy, but genuinely theirs. "Yes," she said. "But on one condition. Anything. We write our own vows together and we keep rewriting them. Every year we sit down and revise them, based on what we've learned, how we've changed, who we're becoming. Because that's what this is. Not a finished story, but an ongoing collaboration. Not a perfect narrative, but a real life." Adrian's smile was genuine, unguarded, full of the kind of joy that only comes from genuine connection. "I think that's the best idea you've ever had." They married in the spring, a small ceremony with only a handful of people, David, some of Laura's colleagues, a few of Adrian's authors. No family, because Laura's was gone and Adrian's had long since disowned him. But it felt right. Felt like they were building something new rather than trying to recreate what had been lost. During the ceremony, when it came time for vows, they took turns reading from a notebook they'd filled together over the past month. Adrian spoke first. "I vow to see you as you are, not as I wish you to be. I vow to let you write yourself, even when your narrative contradicts mine. I vow to love you without needing to document you. I vow to accept that you might leave, and to never use my love as a cage. I vow to keep growing, keep changing, keep learning how to be worthy of you." Then Laura. "I vow to stay only as long as this serves both of us. I vow to be honest about my needs, my fears, my boundaries. I vow to love you without losing myself. I vow to challenge you when you slip back into old patterns, I vow to remember that I have the power to write my own ending and to trust you enough to write it together." They were strange vows, unconventional, focused more on autonomy than unity. But they were true. And when Adrian kissed her, his wife, his partner, his co-author, Laura felt something she'd never felt before, complete. Not because someone had made her complete, but because she'd finally learned to be whole on her own and chosen to share that wholeness with someone else. The reception was small, held in Adrian's townhouse, though they were already discussing selling it, finding something that belonged to both of them rather than just him. At one point, Laura found herself standing in the study where so much had happened, looking at the corkboard where Adrian had once mapped out his obsession. It was empty now, all the photographs and notes removed, just blank cork waiting for something new. "What will you put there?" David asked, coming to stand beside her. "Now that the investigation is over, now that the story is finished?" Laura smiled. "Nothing. We're leaving it blank. A reminder that not everything needs to be documented. That some moments are meant to be lived, not analyzed. Your mother would be proud," David said quietly, "of how you handled this, of the woman you became, would she, even though I chose the exact path she engineered for me? Even though I'm playing my part in the narrative she helped create? You're not playing a part. You're living your life. Yes, you were guided here. Yes, there were influences and manipulations along the way. But you made the crucial choices yourself. You left when you needed to. You came back on your own terms. You established boundaries. You built something real out of all the fiction. That's not following a script. That's authorship." Laura nodded, blinking back tears. "I wish I could tell her that. That I understand now. That I forgive her. I think she knows. Wherever she is, if she's anywhere, I think she knows." They stood there in comfortable silence, looking at that blank board, until Adrian found them and pulled Laura away to dance. And as they swayed together in the living room, no formal first dance, no spotlight, just two people moving to music only they could hear, Laura thought about all the narratives that had led to this moment. Her mother's sacrifice, Laura Thorne's tragedy, David's wife's death, Adrian's obsession, her own survival. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't even a particularly healthy love story, but it was real. It was theirs. And it was in its own complicated way exactly what she'd always wanted, to matter, to be seen, to be part of something bigger than herself while still remaining herself. Years later, when people would ask how they met, Laura would smile and say, "It's complicated." And it was. Too complicated to explain at dinner parties, too dark for polite company. But in private, when it was just her and Adrian, they'd tell the real story. All of it. The manipulation, the conspiracy, the decades of orchestration. They'd be honest about how twisted it all was, how unhealthy, how close they'd both come to destruction. But they'd also talk about the growth, the change, the way two broken people had found a way to be broken together without breaking each other, the way love could exist even in imperfect circumstances, the way you could acknowledge the darkness and still choose light, and sometimes, late at night in their new house, a place they'd chosen together, decorated together, built a life in together, Laura would pull out that old manuscript, the memoir of Laura Thorne, completed with her own additions. She'd read the ending she'd written, about escape and survival and learning to live without needing resolution. And she'd think about how strange it was that she'd written someone else's happy ending before she'd known how to write her own. But now she knew. Now she understood that happy endings weren't about perfect circumstances, or ideal relationships, or finding someone who completed you. They were about choosing every day to keep writing, to keep collaborating, to keep building something meaningful out of the raw materials of your own damaged life. Adrian would find her reading sometimes, would sit beside her and ask if she had any regrets. And Laura would always say no, not because it had been easy or simple or right, but because it had been hers. Her choice, her story, her ending, however unconventional, however complicated, however imperfect it might be. And in a world where so many women never got to write their own stories, never got to choose their own paths, never got to claim authorship of their own lives, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like victory.